Picture a cage, not a prison cell with iron bars and a lock. A different kind of cage, a beautiful one. Inside it, there is a comfortable chair, a warm lamp, a shelf of books, a cup of something hot, a plant growing quietly in the corner. Everything a person might need to feel at ease. The lighting is soft. The temperature is perfect. The cage is large enough to stand, to stretch, to walk a few steps in any direction. It is not a dungeon. It is a furnished room with bars on the windows, so well appointed that the bars stopped looking like bars and started looking like decor. The door of the cage is open, not locked, not hidden, not even partially closed. It is swung wide, and through it a world is visible, a vast, bright, moving world with wind and distance and the smell of things that are not familiar. The door has been open for years. Nobody is guarding it. Nobody has told the man inside he cannot leave. There is no keeper. There is no rule. There is only the chair and the warmth and the quiet conviction that leaving would be harder than staying, and that staying is fine. He does not leave, not because he cannot, not because the door is shut, not because anyone is stopping him. He does not leave because the cage is comfortable enough to make the world outside look like effort. He does not leave because the chair holds him the way a mother holds a child who is afraid of the dark, gently, warmly, and with a firmness that feels like love. And the open door, which has been open all along, has become invisible to him, the way anything you stop looking at becomes invisible. The most dangerous cages are not always the ones that lock you in. Sometimes they are the ones you become too comfortable to leave. This is the comfort trap, and it does not look like a trap. It looks like a life. It looks like the job you no longer question, the routine you no longer examine, the evenings that repeat themselves so faithfully that you stop noticing they repeat. It looks like the comfort that was supposed to be a rest stop and became a residence. The trap is not cruelty. The trap is warmth, applied long enough that you forget the door is there. This is an audiobook about the cage that does not lock you in, the comfort that slowly becomes a cage, and the practice of walking out while the door is still open, not because the cage is unbearable, but because the world is worth the effort. Safety is not the enemy. Comfort is not the villain. The body needs rest, the mind needs ease, and a life with no comfort at all is not a life, it is a sentence. The problem is not that comfort exists. The problem is that comfort, when it becomes permanent, quietly turns into something else. It stops being a place you visit and becomes a place you live, and the living slowly removes the very things that made you capable of growth. The friction, the uncertainty, the effort that stretches a person beyond what they already know. There is a difference between a life that is safe and a life that is stuck, and the line between them is thinner than it looks. Safe means the essentials are covered: shelter, food, stability, a floor that does not give way. Stuck means the essentials are so well covered that nothing new is ever required of you. Safe is the foundation. Stuck is what happens when the foundation becomes the whole house, and you stop building upward because the ground is so comfortable to stand on. The transition from safe to stuck is invisible because it happens by subtraction. Nothing dramatic occurs. No crisis arrives. Instead, the challenges that used to be part of daily life are gradually removed by a better job, by a settled routine, by a partner who handles the hard conversations, by an income that removes the urgency, by a life that has been optimized for ease. Each removal feels like progress. The difficult commute becomes remote work. The anxious uncertainty becomes a predictable schedule. The hunger becomes comfort. And one day you realize you have not been stretched in years, and the muscles that used to rise to a challenge have atrophied so gently you did not feel them go. A man described it as the year he noticed he had not been nervous in a decade. Not relaxed, not nervous. He had built a life so free of friction that nothing asked him to grow, and the absence of nerves meant the absence of edges. He was safe. He was also stuck, and the stuckness had felt like peace because nothing hurt. But nothing grew either, and the quiet flatness he called contentment was the flatness of a life that had stopped asking him to become more than he already was. A fuller way to recognize the shift from safe to stuck: audit the edges. When did you last do something for the first time? When did you last feel the particular discomfort of not knowing whether you would succeed? When did you last receive feedback that stung and use it to change? If the answers are months or years ago, the shift has happened and the safety has quietly become the stuck, and the stuck has been so comfortable that you mistook it for arrival. The audit is not to shame. It is to locate, because you cannot leave a cage you have not identified, and the safest cage is the one that does not look like a cage at all. It looks like a life you are proud of, and the pride is real and the stuckness is real, and both can be true at once. The work is to keep the safety and remove the stuck, by reintroducing, deliberately, the edges that the comfort removed. Rest is necessary. Retreat is the problem, and the two are so easily confused that most people do not know which one they are doing. Rest is a pause taken to recover, so that you can return to the challenge renewed. Retreat is a pause taken to avoid, so that you do not have to return at all. Rest serves growth. Retreat serves comfort, and the comfort trap survives by dressing retreat in the language of rest, so that withdrawal looks like wisdom and avoidance feels like self-care. The confusion is understandable because the body cannot tell the difference in the moment. A rest and a retreat both involve stepping back, sitting down, doing less. The difference is in what happens after. Rest ends and you return to the work, the run, the conversation, the hard thing with a fuller tank. Retreat does not end. It extends quietly, and the return never comes because the pause was never meant to be a pause. It was meant to be an exit, and the exit became a home. A useful test. When you rest, you can feel the recovery happening. The body loosens, the mind clears, and after a measured time, you feel ready to re-engage. When you retreat, the recovery does not arrive. You rest and rest and rest, and the tiredness does not lift because the tiredness was never physical. It was the fatigue of avoidance, and avoidance cannot be rested away because the thing you are avoiding is still waiting, and the waiting costs more energy than the doing ever would have. The distinction matters because the comfort trap feeds on the confusion. Every time you call a retreat a rest, you teach yourself that withdrawal is recovery, and the lesson hardens into a habit. Soon you retreat from every difficulty, calling it self-care, and the life you are caring for shrinks to the size of the cage, because the cage is where nothing asks anything of you. Rest is a room you visit. Retreat is a room you lock from the inside. Learn to tell them apart in your own mouth, the rest that serves the return, and the retreat that prevents it. And you have found one of the most practical distinctions in the whole of personal growth. The human mind does not always choose what is best. It chooses what is known. The familiar has a seductive quality that the better cannot match, because the familiar is already proven safe and the better is, by definition, unproven. The mind does not want the optimal. It wants the predictable, and it will trade growth, joy, opportunity, even meaning, for the simple relief of knowing what comes next. This is not weakness. It is the architecture of a brain that evolved in a world where the unknown was dangerous and the familiar was, on average, safer. The preference for the known was a survival feature. It still is, in the right context. The problem is that the context has changed, and the preference has not. The modern world does not reward the person who stays in the cave. It rewards the person who can tolerate the unfamiliar long enough to learn it, and then stay long enough to master it, and then leave again for the next unfamiliar thing. But the brain still whispers that the cave is where you belong, because the cave is where nothing has ever eaten you. A concrete example of the familiar winning over the better. A person stays in a job they have outgrown for years, not because the job is good, but because the job is known. The tasks are known. The people are known. The commute, the complaints, the Friday routine, all known, all predictable, all frictionless in the way that only familiarity can be. A better job is available, one that would stretch them, pay more, and open doors. They do not take it, not because the better job is worse. Because the better job is unfamiliar, and the unfamiliar costs energy the known does not, and the brain reads that cost as risk. So they stay. The known wins. The better waits. And the person, years later, wonders why their life feels smaller than their ambition. The comfort trap thrives on this preference. It does not need to be a golden cage. It only needs to be a familiar one. Familiarity is the lock, and the lock is so gentle you do not feel it close. The remedy is not to despise the familiar but to stop treating it as the default. When you feel the pull to stay because staying is known, name it. This is the familiar, not the better. The familiar is allowed. It is just not allowed to be the only thing in a life. Because a life with only the familiar is a life that stopped growing, and the growth stopped so gently that the person never felt it go. A concrete way to notice the familiar winning in real time. The next time you face a choice between the known and the better, the same restaurant or the new one, the same route or the unfamiliar, the same opinion or the one that requires you to update, catch the feeling that pulls you toward the known. That feeling is not wisdom. It is the brain's preference for the proven dressed as prudence. Name it. This is the familiar, not the better. Then make the choice consciously, not automatically. You may still choose the familiar, and that is fine, some of the time. The trap is not in choosing the familiar. It is in choosing it so often that the better stops appearing, because the person who always chooses the known stops encountering the unknown, and the not encountering is the narrowing, and the narrowing is the cage. An easy day costs nothing in the moment. The cost arrives later, quietly, in the form of a life that did not develop the capacity for difficulty. Easy days, accumulated, produce a person who is comfortable and unprepared, like a muscle that was never loaded and cannot, when the load finally comes, bear it. The easy day is not the enemy. The easy life is, and the easy life is built one easy day at a time. The cost is invisible because it is paid in what you did not become, the skill you did not learn because the known job did not require it, the courage you did not build because the familiar path did not demand it, the resilience you did not develop because the smooth routine never tested it. None of these show up on a difficult day because none of them were built. And the difficult day always comes, not because life is cruel, but because life is wide, and a narrow life eventually meets something wider than itself. A fuller picture of the cost. A person lives in the easy lane for a decade, the job that does not stretch, the evenings that do not challenge, the conversations that do not risk. The decade feels fine. Then a crisis arrives, a loss, a change, a door that opens and requires a step the person has never practiced. The step is not impossible. It is simply unfamiliar, and the person has spent 10 years training the opposite of the step, staying, smoothing, avoiding. The crisis does not destroy them. It reveals them, and what it reveals is a person who has been comfortable for so long that the muscles for difficulty have gone quiet. The easy days did not cause the crisis. They caused the unpreparedness, and the unpreparedness is the real cost. Price the easy day honestly. It is not free. It costs a rep, a stretch, a small courage that was not built because the day did not require it. This does not mean every day should be hard. It means the easy days should be chosen, not defaulted into, and balanced against the days that build. A life with no easy days burns out. A life with only easy days atrophies. The cost of easy days is the person you could have become if some of those days had asked more of you, and the quiet regret of looking back at a decade of comfort and finding no stories of growth. A way to price the easy day, because the cost is abstract until you make it concrete. At the end of an easy day, ask one question: what did today build? Not what did today accomplish. The easy day can accomplish plenty by the metrics of the comfortable life. What did it build in the person, in the capacity, in the muscle, in the courage? If the answer is nothing, the easy day was a rest, and rest is allowed. If the answer is nothing, and yesterday's answer was nothing, and the day before was nothing, the easy days have become the life, and the life is the cage, and the cost is being paid in the person you are not becoming. One easy day is fine. 2 is fine. A decade of them is the trap, and the trap is not the individual day. It is the accumulation, and the accumulation is the cost, and the cost is invisible because it is paid in what did not happen. The comfort loop is the cycle that keeps the trap sealed from the inside. It works like this. Comfort reduces friction. Reduced friction reduces effort. Reduced effort reduces growth. Reduced growth reduces the tolerance for friction. And reduced tolerance makes comfort more attractive. The loop feeds itself. Each turn makes the next turn easier and the exit harder, because the exit requires friction, and friction is the one thing the loop has been training you to avoid. The loop does not announce itself. It feels like a life getting smoother, and smoothness feels like success. A person in the loop does not feel trapped. They feel settled, and settled feels like the goal. But settled, when it means the absence of all challenge, is not a goal. It is a tombstone for growth, and the person inside the loop does not know they are in it, because the loop is made of the same material as a comfortable life, and the comfortable life is indistinguishable from the inside from a life that has simply stopped. A concrete loop to recognize. A person finds a routine that works, the same job, the same evenings, the same weekends. The routine is comfortable, so they keep it. Keeping it means no new inputs, which means no new outputs, which means the person they are next year is the same as the person they are this year, only slightly more entrenched in the routine. The entrenchment makes the routine feel more necessary, because the idea of changing it now feels harder than it did a year ago. 5 years in, the routine is not a choice. It is a groove so deep that leaving it would feel like stepping off a cliff, and the cliff is imaginary, and the comfort is real, and the loop closes. The way out of the loop is not a dramatic escape. It is a single, small reintroduction of friction, one thing that is slightly harder than the routine, one challenge that is slightly unfamiliar, one moment of voluntary discomfort that reminds the body and the mind that they can bear a load, and that bearing a load is not the same as suffering. The loop breaks not by being torn apart but by being stretched, one thread at a time, until the person remembers that the edge of the cage is not a wall. It is a door, and the door is open, and the only thing keeping them inside is the loop's quiet whisper that outside is too much effort. A way to hear the loop in your own life, because it is silent by design. The loop sounds like reasonableness. I'll do it next year. It's not the right time. I'm comfortable enough. Each of these is the loop speaking, and each sounds like prudence because the loop borrows the language of wisdom to protect the comfort. Catch the language. When you hear yourself say, "not yet," about something that matters, ask, is the timing actually wrong, or is the comfort actually right, and the comfort is what I am protecting? The answer is usually the second, and the honesty is the first thread to pull. The loop cannot survive being seen clearly because it requires the cover of reasonableness. And once you strip the cover, the choice is exposed. I am staying because I am comfortable, and the comfort is the cage, and the door is open, and I could leave today. Most people do not change until pain forces them. This is not a character flaw. It is a pattern, and the pattern is so common that it deserves a name: the pain threshold. The pain threshold is the point at which the discomfort of staying finally exceeds the discomfort of changing, and the person moves. Before that point, the comfort of staying is greater than the effort of leaving, so they stay. After that point, the pain of staying is greater than the pain of changing, so they go. The whole life is a balance, and the balance is weighted toward comfort until comfort breaks. The problem with waiting for pain is that the cost is paid in years. The years between the moment you could have changed and the moment pain forces you to, those years are the real price, and they are paid in the currency of unlived growth, unused capacity, and the slow narrowing of a life that stayed in the cage because the cage did not hurt enough to leave. The pain threshold is not a strategy. It is a default, and the default means you only move when the cage becomes unbearable, which means the cage was comfortable for years, and the comfort was the thing that kept you in it. A person who waited for pain described it as the decade between 30 and 40. The job was fine. The life was fine. Fine was the word, and fine was the cage. Nothing hurt enough to change, so nothing changed, until the body started to fail and the health crisis made the job unsustainable, and the change that could have been gradual became an emergency. The emergency cost more than the gradual change would have. The pain threshold did not protect them. It just delayed the change until the change was expensive, and the delay was the cost. The alternative is voluntary change before pain, not recklessly, not dramatically, but deliberately, choosing a small change while the cage is still comfortable enough that you could stay, because staying is easy, and that is exactly why you should not. The person who changes before pain is not braver. They are simply more honest about the cost of waiting, and they have decided that the cost of staying, the quiet years of comfortable stagnation, is higher than the cost of a small, chosen discomfort now. Do not wait for pain. Pain is not a teacher. It is a debt collector, and the debt is always larger than the change would have been. A way to practice voluntary change before pain forces it, because the principle is easy to agree with and hard to do. Pick one thing in your life that is comfortable but not growing, a job, a habit, a routine, a conversation you have been avoiding. Ask, if I waited until this became painful, what would the pain look like, and how much would it cost? The answer is the price of waiting, and seeing the price is the motivation the comfort was hiding from you. Now choose a small change, not the whole transformation, just the first step, and take it while the cage is still comfortable, because the whole point is that the change is harder when the pain has already arrived, and the change is a practice, and the practice is easier to start from comfort than from crisis. The person who changes before pain is not a hero. They are simply someone who saw the bill early and decided to pay it in small, manageable installments rather than in one devastating sum. Avoidance is the comfort trap's quiet engine, and it is hidden because it works by not doing. You do not see the difficult conversation because you avoid it. You do not feel the challenge because you retreat from it. You do not experience the growth because you dodge the moment that would have produced it. Avoidance is invisible by design because its whole function is to make the thing you are avoiding disappear from your life, and when it disappears, so does the evidence that you avoided it. The price of avoidance is twofold, and both costs are quiet. The first is the cost of the thing not done, the conversation not had, the skill not learned, the risk not taken, the life not lived. These show up as absences, and absences are hard to feel because you cannot grieve what you never attempted. The second cost is the cost to the self, the slow erosion of the belief that you can handle difficulty, because you keep choosing not to, and each choice teaches the mind that difficulty is something to be escaped rather than met. A concrete example. A person avoids conflict for a decade, not the dramatic kind, but the small, necessary kind. The boundary not set, the disagreement not voiced, the truth not told. Each avoidance feels like peace because the moment of friction was prevented and the peace is real in the short term. But the peace is bought with a currency called self-respect, and the account drains slowly, and the person does not notice until they look up one day and realize they have been agreeable for 10 years and have lost the ability to disagree, and the loss is not just the skill of speaking up. It is the identity of someone who can be trusted to tell the truth, including to themselves. The hidden price of avoidance is the person you become by not doing the hard things. That person is comfortable. That person is also smaller than the person they could have been, and the smallness is invisible because it was created by subtraction, not by damage. The cage did not shrink you. You shrank yourself, one avoided moment at a time, until the cage felt like the right size. The remedy is not to seek out conflict or difficulty for its own sake. It is to notice when you are avoiding something that matters, and to do it anyway, not because it is easy, but because the cost of not doing it has been hiding in the shape of your life, and the shape has been getting smaller, and you would like it to stop. A way to measure the hidden price, because what is hidden cannot be counted until it is named. For 1 week, mark every avoidance, the conversation not had, the truth not told, the risk not taken, the challenge not met. Do not fix them, just mark them. At the end of the week, look at the list and ask, what did each avoidance cost me? Not in stress, which you already felt. In the person you did not become because you did not do the thing. The list is the hidden price, made visible, and the visibility is the first step to paying it differently, not with more avoidance, but with the small, deliberate act of doing the next thing on the list. And the next, until the shape of your life starts growing again, and the growth is the refund on the price you have been paying in silence for years. Voluntary discomfort is the antidote to the comfort trap, and it is exactly what it sounds like: choosing on purpose, a thing that is harder than it needs to be because the hardness is what you have been missing. Not suffering, not punishment, not deprivation for its own sake. A chosen, measured, intentional challenge that reintroduces the friction the comfort loop removed and reminds the body and the mind that they can bear a load. The key word is voluntary. Involuntary discomfort, the crisis, the loss, the forced change, is what the comfort trap leads to eventually, because a life with no voluntary friction eventually meets involuntary friction, and the unprepared person breaks. Voluntary discomfort is the practice of introducing small, controlled amounts of the thing the trap has been protecting you from, so that when the larger thing comes, you have a tolerance and a history and an identity that says you can handle it. Voluntary discomfort does not mean self-punishment. It does not mean sleep deprivation, dangerous behavior, ignoring health, or constant overwork. Rest remains necessary. Recovery is sacred. The goal is not to eliminate comfort from your life. The goal is to stop using comfort as permanent avoidance, to stop letting the chair in the cage be the reason you never stand up, and to start using challenge as a tool for growth, balanced with the rest that makes growth sustainable. A practical example: a person who has not exercised in years starts with one cold shower a week, not because cold showers are magic, but because the shower is a small, voluntary, controlled discomfort that trains the nervous system to tolerate unpleasantness without fleeing. The shower is 3 minutes. It is not dangerous. It is not suffering. It is a rep, and the rep teaches the mind that the body can handle something it does not want to do, and the teaching transfers to the harder things: the conversation, the project, the step outside the cage. Voluntary discomfort is the vaccine. The comfort trap is the disease. The vaccine is small, chosen, and temporary. The disease, untreated, is a life that stays. A practical list of voluntary discomforts to make the principle concrete, because choose discomfort is a slogan until it has a body. A cold shower, 3 minutes twice a week. A conversation you have been avoiding had this week. A physical practice that asks more of your body than your day job does, 3 times a week. A new skill started from scratch, where you are a beginner and the discomfort is the not knowing. A fast, a single meal skipped, not for deprivation but to practice the feeling of wanting and not acting, and to learn that the feeling passes. Each of these is a rep. None is suffering. Each is a small, chosen friction that reintroduces the edge the comfort removed, and the edge reintroduced is the door. Choose one. Start there. The others will follow because the muscle grows and the growing is the door, and the door is the life outside the cage. Courage is not a trait you are born with or without. It is a muscle, and like any muscle, it is built by use and lost by disuse. The comfort trap does not require you to be cowardly. It simply removes the opportunities for courage, because courage requires a thing to be afraid of, and a life with no challenge has nothing to fear. And a person with nothing to fear does not build the muscle that would let them face the thing they eventually will fear. The muscle analogy is exact. A muscle grows by being loaded, slightly beyond its current capacity and then recovering. Load it too little and it atrophies. Load it too much and it tears. Load it just right, repeatedly, with recovery between, and it grows stronger. Courage is the same. It grows by facing small fears, the difficult conversation, the unfamiliar situation, the risk of being wrong, the possibility of rejection, slightly beyond the current capacity, and then resting, and then facing the next one. The comfort trap starves the muscle of any load at all, and the muscle, unloaded, goes quiet. A man who had avoided all risk for a decade described the result as the discovery that he was afraid of everything. Not because he was cowardly by nature, but because the muscle had been so unused that any load felt enormous. The first step was not a grand act of courage. It was a small one: a difficult email, a truth told to a friend, a commitment made and kept. The muscle complained. It was sore, the way an unused muscle is sore after its first workout. But the soreness was the growth, and within weeks the load that had felt enormous felt manageable, and the next load was slightly heavier, and the muscle was ready. So train courage the way you train any muscle. Start small, load slightly beyond comfortable, recover and repeat. Do not start with the largest fear. Start with the smallest one that is still real and let the rep teach you that you can bear it. The comfort trap tells you that the absence of fear means the absence of danger. The truth is that the absence of fear means the absence of growth, because courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move despite it, trained one rep at a time, until the willingness is a part of who you are. A concrete courage rep to start this week because the principle needs a body. Identify one small fear you have been avoiding: a phone call, a confrontation, a submission, a first day. Choose it because it is small enough to survive and real enough to scare you slightly. Schedule it. Do it. Then mark it the way you mark any rep: one line, one date, one proof. The rep does not make you fearless. It makes you someone who moved despite the fear, and that someone is the person the cage could not hold, because the cage requires the person to stay still, and the rep is a motion, and the motion is the first step toward the door. 1 rep this week. 2 next. The muscle grows, the cage shrinks, and the door, which was open all along, gets closer with every rep. The exit from the comfort trap is not a single dramatic act. It is a series of small challenges, each one a rep, each one a small proof that you can bear slightly more than the cage led you to believe. And each rep does something quieter than build courage. It builds identity. Identity is the story you tell about who you are, and the story is written by what you do repeatedly until the doing becomes the being. A person who does the comfortable thing for years develops the identity of someone who does the comfortable thing. The story is not "I am lazy." The story is more subtle and more damaging. I am someone who stays. I am someone who does not rock the boat. I am someone who is content. And the story, told by years of evidence, becomes a self-fulfilling loop, because the identity drives the behavior and the behavior drives the identity. And the loop is the same one that keeps the cage door open and the person inside. The way to change the identity is not to announce it. It is to build the evidence, one small challenge at a time, until the evidence contradicts the old story and the story has to update. A person who has been someone who stays begins once a week to do one slightly uncomfortable thing: a class alone, a trip unplanned, a conversation avoided for months. Each one is a data point, and the data points accumulate into a new story. I am someone who does the uncomfortable thing when it matters. The story is not told. It is built, the way all identity is built, by the slow accumulation of actions that the old self would not have taken. A woman who had been someone who does not risk for 20 years began with 1 risk a month: a small investment, a submitted application, a spoken boundary. Within a year she had a new story, not because she had become a different person, but because she had done enough small challenging things that the old story could no longer survive the evidence. The cage was not broken by a dramatic escape. It was broken by a new identity, built 1 rep at a time, until the person who lived in the cage was no longer the person she was, and the door, which had been open all along, was simply the next step. A note on the pace of identity change, because the trap tells you it is too late. It is not. The identity is not fixed at birth or at 30 or at 50. It is written by the most recent evidence, and the most recent evidence can start today with 1 small challenge, and the story begins to update immediately, because the brain tracks what you have done lately more than what you did long ago. A person who has been someone who stays for 20 years can become someone who stretches in a month, not because the 20 years did not happen, but because the last month is the most recent chapter, and the most recent chapter is the one the brain reads first when it asks, "Who am I?" The new identity is not a denial of the old. It is an update, and the update is available to anyone. At any age, in any cage, the moment the first small challenge is taken and the first piece of new evidence is laid down. The comfort trap survives because escape is rewarded. Every time you avoid the difficult thing and feel the relief of avoidance, the avoidance is reinforced, and the reinforcement is the reward that keeps the loop alive. The relief is real, the body relaxes, the tension drops, the moment passes. But the relief is the reward for retreat, not rest, and rewarding retreat is how the cage becomes a home. The first step is to stop rewarding escape, and the way to do it is not to eliminate the relief, but to make the relief cost more than the avoidance. The cost can be as simple as a rule. Every time you avoid a thing that matters, you do a small, uncomfortable thing immediately, a minute of cold water, a set of push-ups, a written note that says, "I avoided X today." The point is not punishment. The point is to break the association between escape and reward, so that the brain stops reading avoidance as a win. A more structural fix: stop telling the story of avoidance as a story of wisdom. "I decided not to" sounds mature. "I was too tired" sounds caring. "It wasn't the right time" sounds patient. Each of these stories rewards the escape by giving it a dignified name, and the dignity is the lock. Name it honestly. "I avoided it because it was uncomfortable and I chose comfort over growth." The honesty is not shame. It is clarity, and clarity is the first thing the comfort trap cannot survive, because the trap needs the story to stay invisible, and naming it makes it visible, and a visible trap is one you can walk out of. The deepest reward of escape is the quiet it provides, and the quiet is the thing to grieve, because giving up the reward of escape means accepting that growth is louder than comfort, and that the volume is the price. A person who stops rewarding escape will feel, for a while, more discomfort than they have felt in years, and the discomfort is the sound of the cage opening, and the opening is not gentle. But the alternative is the quiet, and the quiet is the cage, and the cage is comfortable, and the comfort is the trap. Stop rewarding escape, and the trap loses its food, and the door becomes visible again, and the world outside it becomes worth the volume. A practical reframe for the moment of escape, because the moment is where the reward lives. When you feel the pull to avoid the conversation, the task, the risk, pause for 3 seconds and ask, "What am I rewarding?" The answer, honestly, is retreat. The 3-second pause does not stop the retreat every time. It simply makes the reward visible, and a visible reward is one you can refuse, and the refusing, done often enough, becomes the new habit, and the new habit is the door. The old habit, escape, relief, reward, is the cage. The new habit, pause, see, choose, is the key, and the key is not a grand gesture. It is a 3-second honesty repeated until the honesty becomes the person, and the person does not need the cage anymore, because the person has learned that the discomfort they were escaping was not the danger. It was the door. The opposite of the comfort trap is not a life of constant suffering. It is a life designed with enough challenge that you are required to grow, enough recovery that the growth is sustainable, and enough meaning that the effort feels worth it. This is the life that replaces the cage. Not a harder cage, but a designed life, one that asks something of you and gives something back, and where the asking and the giving are in balance. Designing a life that requires you means choosing commitments that stretch you, a project that demands skills you do not have, a relationship that asks for honesty you have not practiced, a physical practice that requires a body you have not built. Each of these is a demand, and the demand is the design. The comfort trap removes demands. The design life reintroduces them on purpose, because the demands are what make the life worth living, and the worth is not the same as comfort. Comfort is ease. Worth is effort, and the effort is the thing the cage was protecting you from, and the protection was the problem. A concrete design. A person who has been in the comfort loop for years chooses 3 demands: a physical practice 3 times a week, a creative project that requires weekly output, and a conversation they have been avoiding for a year. Each demand is a thread, and the threads, pulled together, form a life that requires them to show up, to grow, to risk, and to recover. The life is not easy. It is not supposed to be easy. It is supposed to be worth it, and worth it is a different thing from comfortable, and the difference is the whole point. The design is not permanent. It is a living structure, adjusted as the demands become familiar and new demands are added. The comfort trap is static. The designed life is dynamic, and the dynamism is what keeps the door open, because a life that moves does not settle into a cage, and a person who is designing is a person who is not trapped, even when the designing is hard and the comfort is tempting and the cage is right there, offering its old warmth. Design a life that requires you, and you have built the opposite of the trap, a life that is worth the effort and an effort that is worth the life. A note on the fear of the designed life, because it can feel like a trap of its own, a life so full of demands that there is no rest. The design is not a schedule of constant effort. It is a life that includes both the demand and the recovery is part of the design, not an escape from it. The person who designs a life that requires them also designs the rest that makes the requiring sustainable, and the rest is not the cage. The rest is the fuel for the door, and the door is the demand is the growth, and the growth is the life. The design is not a prison. It is a garden, and the garden requires tending, and the tending is the effort, and the effort is the point, and the point is not comfort. The point is a life that asks you to show up, and that you are glad to show up for, because the showing up is the living, and the living is the opposite of the cage. The trap uses rest as a cover for retreat, and the cure is not to eliminate rest, but to separate it from retreat so cleanly that recovery becomes a tool for growth rather than an exit from it. Recovery without retreat is the practice of resting in a way that serves the return, that refuels the body, clears the mind, and prepares the person for the next challenge, rather than using the rest as a way to avoid the next challenge permanently. The distinction restated because it is the whole practical difference. Recovery is rest that ends. Retreat is rest that extends. Recovery refuels for the return. Retreat avoids the return. The comfort trap calls retreat recovery, and the naming is the trap, because a life that retreats and calls it recovery never returns to the challenge, and the life shrinks to the size of the rest, and the rest becomes the whole life, and the whole life becomes the cage. A practical way to keep recovery honest: set an end before you rest. Decide before the rest begins when it will end and what will follow. I rest tonight, and tomorrow I return to the project. The end is the difference. Recovery without an end is retreat. Recovery with an end is rest, and the rest serves the return, and the return is the growth, and the growth is the life outside the cage. A person who had been retreating for years, calling it self-care, found that the self-care never ended because the thing it was caring for was the avoidance, not the self. The rest did not refuel them. It fed the trap. The change was not to eliminate rest. It was to schedule it a day off, a week of lighter effort, a season of recovery with a defined end, and after the end, a return to the demand, because the demand was the thing the self was made for, and the rest was the fuel for the demand, not the replacement for it. Recovery without retreat is the practice of rest as fuel, not rest as hiding, and the practice keeps the door open, because the person who rests to return is a person who is going somewhere, and the person who rests to hide is a person who has arrived at the cage and called it home. A simple test to tell them apart, usable any evening. After a rest, ask, do I feel ready to return, or do I feel reluctant to return? Ready is recovery, reluctant is retreat. The feeling is the diagnostic, and the diagnostic is available to anyone any evening for free. The person who feels ready has rested well, and the rest has served its purpose. The person who feels reluctant has been hiding, and the hiding has deepened the avoidance, and the avoidance is the cage. The test is not a judgment. It is a compass, and the compass points one of two ways, toward the return or toward the cage. Choose the return. Rest and return. Rest and return. That is the rhythm of a life that grows, not constant effort, not constant ease, but the alternation that keeps both the effort and the rest honest, and the honesty is the door, and the door is open, and the life is on the other side. Theory is a map. Practice is the walk. What follows is a simple, original framework for reintroducing healthy challenge into a life that has become too comfortable. 30 days, built from the skills in this audiobook, designed to be kept not perfect. No equipment, no cost, no suffering. Just a series of small, chosen frictions that remind the body and the mind that they can bear a load. The framework is 5 steps, repeated daily. Notice, each day catch one moment where comfort is being chosen over growth. Name it. This is comfort, not rest. This is familiar, not better. This is escape, not recovery. The noticing is the first rep because a seen choice is a choice you can change. Choose. After noticing, choose one small discomfort, a cold shower, a difficult message, a skipped comfort, a new situation. The discomfort should be voluntary, measured, and safe. It is not suffering. It is a rep. Stretch, do the discomfort. Stay with it slightly longer than is comfortable. The stretch is the load, and the load is the growth. The stretch should be small enough to survive and large enough to feel. Recover. After the stretch, rest. Real rest with an end that refuels for the next stretch. The recovery is not retreat. It is the other half of the growth, and without it the stretch becomes punishment. Repeat. The next day, do it again, with a slightly different discomfort or the same one slightly larger. The repetition is what builds the muscle, the identity, and the tolerance for the friction the trap removed. Over 30 days, the pattern is simple. Each week, the discomforts grow slightly, the recovery stays honest, and the identity quietly shifts from someone who stays to someone who chooses the stretch. By day 30, the cage is not broken. The door, which was open all along, is simply visible again, and the person is standing near it, and the world outside it looks less like effort and more like the life they were supposed to be living. The practice does not end. It becomes the way you live, not seeking suffering but not avoiding growth, and knowing the difference. A closing note on the protocol, because protocols can become their own cages. The 30 days are a doorway, not a doctrine. If a day is genuinely too hard, illness, crisis, real exhaustion, rest, and resume the next day without guilt. The protocol is not a test of toughness. It is a training in discernment, and discernment includes knowing when to rest. The only failure is stopping permanently, and even that is fixable because the door is always open, and the practice is always available, and the cage is always escapable, and the 30 days are simply the first 30 days of a life that decided to stop using comfort as permanent avoidance. Walk through the door. The world is there. The strangest thing about the comfort trap is that the door was never locked. The person inside was never prevented from leaving. The cage was comfortable, and the comfort was the lock, and the lock was so gentle that it felt like a hug, and the hug was the thing that held them in place for years. The door has been open all along, and the only thing between the person and the world was the decision to stand up and walk through it. This is both the tragedy and the hope of the comfort trap. The tragedy is that the years in the cage were voluntary, and the person could have left at any time and did not, because the chair was warm and the world was effort, and the effort felt like more than they could bear. The hope is that the exit requires no key, no permission, no crisis. The exit requires only the recognition that the door is open, and the willingness to stand, and the acceptance that the first step will be uncomfortable, and that the discomfort is not the cage. It is the door. A man who had been in the cage for a decade, the same job, the same routine, the same comfortable evenings, described the moment he left, not as a dramatic escape but as a quiet standing up. He had been sitting in the same chair in the same room, and he realized the door was open, and he had known it was open, and he had not walked through it because the chair was warm. He stood. The standing was harder than the walking, because the standing was the decision, and the decision was the thing the comfort had been protecting him from. He walked through the door. The world was bright and large and slightly cold and absolutely worth it. The door has been open all along. The cage was never locked. The comfort was the only guard, and the guard was gentle, and the gentleness was the trap. The way out is not a battle. It is a standing up, a walking through, and a willingness to be uncomfortable for the sake of a life that is larger than the cage. The life outside the door is not easy. It is not supposed to be easy. It is supposed to be lived, and lived is a different thing from comfortable, and the difference is the whole story. A closing image to carry. The man in the cage is not a prisoner. He is a person who found a comfortable chair in a room with an open door, and the comfort was enough to make the door invisible, and the invisibility was enough to make the staying permanent. But the door is there. It has always been there. And the only thing required to see it is to look up from the chair, and the only thing required to walk through it is to stand, and the standing is the hardest part, and the hardest part is available to you in the next 5 minutes. The cage is not your life. The comfort is not your identity. The door is open. Look up, stand, walk. The world has been waiting, and it will not judge you for the time you spent in the chair. It will simply be glad you stood. The cage is still there. It will always be there because comfort is always available, and the world will always offer a chair that is warmer than the path. The work is not to destroy the cage. The work is to stop living in it, to visit the comfort when rest is needed, and to leave when rest is done, and to build a life where the visits are shorter than the journeys, and the journeys are the point. Leave the cage. Not because the cage is cruel, it is not. Not because the cage is unbearable, it is comfortable, and that is the problem. Leave the cage because the door is open, and the world is outside it, and the years you have been sitting in the chair are years the world has been waiting, and the waiting is not a judgment. It is an invitation, and the invitation has been standing all along, patient and bright, on the other side of a door you have not walked through because the chair was too warm to leave. The most dangerous cages are not always the ones that lock you in. Sometimes they are the ones you become too comfortable to leave. But you can leave. You could always leave. The door is open. The world is there. And the life that feels safe is not the only life you are allowed to live. It is simply the one you got used to, and the getting used to is not the same as the choosing, and the choosing is yours today in the next small step through a door that has been open all along. Stand up, walk through. The cage was never the life. It was the comfort, and the comfort was never the goal. The goal was the growth, and the growth is on the other side of the door, and the door is open, and it has been open all along.